Hello and welcome to this week's Geography at the Garibaldi School. This is Mr. Brennan and I'm going to take you through your next lesson when we're thinking about energy as a resource. Remember, energy is the topic we're looking at and it is from paper 2 of your GCSE. Last time I asked you to look at two key objectives, the first of which were what are the factors affecting energy supply and energy demand. Ideally, you should have broken these down into two key factors. They're physical and human. Remember, physical meaning things that are natural and to do with the environment and the world we live in. Human are things that we do, things that we can have an impact on. And in those physical factors, two most obvious ones are geology and climate. Geology is an important one because geology will affect your fossil fuel reserves. If your geological conditions aren't right, you won't have oil, you won't have gas, you won't have coal. And remember that still roughly 80% of the world's energy is made or produced by burning fossil fuels. So geology is really key. If you haven't got it, you can't use it. The second applies more to sort of renewables, and this is climate. And again, it's pretty much the same. If you haven't got it, you can't use it. But if you haven't got wind, you can't use wind turbines. If you haven't got plentiful supplies of sunlight, you can't use solar panel. If you're not surrounded by an ocean or a sea, you can't use tidal. So physical factors will have an impact on what type of energy you can produce. And a really good example of that would be Iceland. Iceland has got an active volcano. We call it the Eiger. But the correct name is the Eyjafjallajökull. That's terrible Icelandic there. But that volcano allows Iceland to produce all of its energy through geothermal. It uses the heat of the tectonic activity to produce energy. We can't do that in the UK because we have no active volcanoes. So there are a really good example there. For the human side of things, we have three main reasons. The first is costs. Obviously, we want to be able to afford our energy. That makes us energy secure. Remember, security is not just about having enough, it's about being able to afford to access it. So costs is the first thing. What's the cheapest way to access your energy? Can you afford it? That's particularly an issue for countries that have to import some of their energy that don't have natural geology, for example. So you can see where this starts to link up. Second thing is linked to level of development more. It's about technology. Do you have the right technology to access the energy? Can you design solar panels? Can you design wind turbines? Do you have the right technology to drill for oil? Again, that is very much linked to level of development, whether you're a hick, a lick or a knee. Third reason is political. And again, political is where countries who have to work together maybe over energy resources could lead to some conflict. A really good point with this is Russia as a nation. They have a plentiful supply of gas, and at times when they supply gas to Western Europe, they can threaten to turn the gas supply off. This is obviously a political tension and can cause energy insecurity. In terms of the factors affecting the demand, well, we spoke about this a little bit last week. It is about population size. It is about your access to resources or cars and vehicles and housing and industry. They all have a big impact. Quite a straightforward objective, but have a quick look back through your work and see, is there an area that you think you need to improve on, or is something you need to ask any of your geography team? The second objective was about the impacts of being energy insecure. So if you're energy insecure, what impacts can that have? And you categorize some statements into a variety of different groups. So one of those groups was political conflicts. And again, you can think about Russia with their gas and the conflict it has with surrounding countries at times. But they were more than down to things like the impact it would have on industry, the impact it might have on food manufacturing, environmental impacts of searching for new energy. And if we think about our cold environment work, we've looked at Alaska and its massive supply of oil, but it's a wilderness. We don't want to drill there. It's not ideal for the environmental impact it might have. Again, I think it was a relatively straightforward objective. And again, any questions, please be in touch with the member of the geography team and we'll help you. So on to this week's two objectives. They're pretty short again. So the first one is, if we know some countries are energy insecure, what are the strategies for increasing energy supply and reducing this energy insecurity? So basically, how can we stop places being energy insecure, not having enough energy or not affording or accessing enough energy? To do this, what I want you to do is have a quick look at the information sheet that has been uploaded in Teams. Read the information, strategies to increase energy supply, and annotate it or make some notes around it, thinking about that 6-mark question. Explain how energy security can be improved. Pause the video here, come back to me when you've done that. Okay, welcome back. This is the sheet that you should have looked at. It starts off by talking about fossil fuels. We know that fossil fuels are a huge contributor to the global energy mix. They're still used, even though we know that they've got detrimental qualities for the environment with carbon dioxide. And we know that they're finite as well. They're going to run out. And we know that some places in the world don't have access to them. So we need to start thinking about how we might replace them, but still stay energy secure, still not develop that massive energy gap. Remember, the energy gap is where you stop using one type of energy, but it creates a bit of a gap in your energy supply, so you need to fill it as quickly as you can. The two main ways that are talked about here are alternative, renewables, and you should know quite a lot of renewables: solar, wind, wave energy, geothermal energy. So they're all types of renewable. But the second one is a really interesting option, which is nuclear. And today, 5% of global energy comes from nuclear power. And this is a very controversial geographical issue. And it is a issue that divides countries in terms of their approach. There are some advantages to it. It is an effective way to form energy and produce energy. It is an effective way to do this without using a lot of resources. So they use mainly uranium for nuclear fission. But it's also controversial because of the risks attached to it. Although accidents are relatively infrequent, when something with nuclear radiation goes wrong, it has a significant impact. And any of you that want to do a little bit of wider reading, you can look at Chernobyl and see what happened there. It is an option though, and it's one that we need to keep in mind. So renewables, nuclear. A third option might be to use cleaner types of fossil fuels. Cleaner types of fossil fuels mainly involve things like gas. Natural gas is actually far cleaner than coal and oil. It's not ideal, it still produces CO2, but it's still an option that is there. And we will look at that as the next objective. So having read through this sheet and thought about your notes, what I now want you to do is have a go at this 6-mark question. It's all AO1 and AO2 because the trigger word is explain. There's no evaluate, there's no assess, it's just explain. So, a little bit of a structure for you. I want you to think about those things. Define energy security, explain the limitations of fossil fuels, but then maybe talk about how oil, not oil or coal, gas might be the best or preferred option. Then think about your renewable options, then think about your nuclear options. Remember, 3 AO1 with 3 AO2, and if you want to be really clever, double develop some of that AO2 with furthermores, building on this, adding to this. Pause here and come back to me shortly. And welcome back. What we're going to do here is a little bit of self-assessment. So your teachers will probably give you some feedback in this next week, but I'd like you to assess this yourself using this mark scheme. Clearly, I want you to pick out the AO1 and the AO2. Have you defined it? Have you then thought about renewables, an advantage and a disadvantage maybe? Have you then thought about nuclear or wind farms or solar farms in the UK? Have you thought about industry and the amount that they need and providing this regular? Have you thought about the idea of gas as an alternative? The way I want you to really mark this, because it really doesn't matter whether you get 5 or 6 or 3 or 4, but it matters whether you get level 1, level 2 or level 3. Are you basic? You make basic points but they're not really that well developed. Are you clear? Good terminology, good explanations, or are you detailed? For detailed, I would think you'd need a couple of bits of double development to get into detailed. Okay. Pause it on the mark scheme if you need it. I'm going to move on. So I just talked about natural gas, and I want us to think about this as our case study of a fossil fuel. You may well have looked at coal, or you might well have looked at oil in other subject areas, particularly science, and we know some of the positives and negatives of using that type of resource. But I want to think particularly in geography about natural gas, and the reason for this is it's slightly different to coal and oil because it's slightly cleaner, it's slightly less impactful on the environment. In your booklet you've got this little bit of introduction to natural gas. You can see where there's the natural gas reserves. I've spoken about Russia before, but you'll see that it's quite significantly smaller in quite a lot of countries once you get past the first 3 or 4. So it's a nice natural resource to have. You can see it can be used for our key sectors. You can see it can be used in residential, making electricity, industry, commercial. Currently provides 24% of the world's energy supply. It is dependent, whether you've got it or not, on your geological conditions. So not everywhere in the world has got natural gas, and therefore to use it you would have to have gas imported into your country. That can create political tensions. The next slide is basically your plan for your 6-mark question. I appreciate by giving you this slide, it's pretty straightforward. So what I want you to do is, using this, I want you to put together your 6-mark answer, but it must be double developed. It must use great terminology. It must be in that level 3 detailed section. There's no excuse for it not to be. I think it's enough to try and revise if you wanted to make a flashcard. I think it's enough to know one environmental advantage and disadvantage, and one practical advantage and disadvantage, and one economic advantage and disadvantage. I certainly want you to focus on the fact that it is a cleaner fuel, producing less carbon emissions. However, it still does produce carbon emissions. That's greenhouse gases. That's the advanced greenhouse effect. That is climate change. Once you've analysed this table and you've thought about it and you maybe added a couple of notes to it, I want you to complete this question. Pause the video. I'll come back to you shortly. Okay, and welcome back. There we go. Mark scheme. Some points down the side for the key points that you should have made, and hopefully you might think you have got yourself a perfect detailed answer. If you didn't get some of those bullet points, what I'd like you to do is add them, not in terms of adding to the question, but add them to your work on natural gas. Maybe make another table of all the advantages and disadvantages. Some of them are positives, some of them are negatives. And that brings us to the end of the second objective for this week and this week's learning. As always, if you find you've got some time and you want to make some geography resources, feel free. If you've got any problems with any of this work, get in touch with us. And if not, enjoy the learning, work hard, and take good care. Till next time, signing off.